Because the name of this peaceful town, Allende, belongs to a man who was executed as a traitor to the crown. He was shot, decapitated, and his head was put into a metal cage and hung from the corner of a public building as a warning to anyone else who might dare to defy the power of Spain. So let's really dig into this paradox. How does a man who is trained to create and maintain order, a man who believes in rank, in command, in controlled, predictable outcomes, how does he end up at the very center of a movement where none of those things exist? To find the answer, we have to understand the world that created him. Ignacio Allende was born in 1769. And he wasn't just born in a town, he was born inside of a system. He was a product of a region called the Bajío, right in the heart of what was then New Spain. And to really get the Bajío of the 18th century, you have to stop thinking of it as a landscape and start thinking of it as a machine. It was this vast, humming, interconnected engine of wealth, and it was designed for one purpose: to power a global empire. It was an engine of farms and of mines, where every single gear meshed perfectly with the next. The fields grew the grain to feed the miners. The mines produced the silver to fuel the world. It was a place of constant motion, of circulation, all for an imperial purpose. Just try to picture it. Caravans of mules, packed heavy with grain, constantly moving toward the huge mining centers like Guanajuato. In those mines, thousands of men disappear into the earth, down these incredible shafts, to bring up silver ore. That silver is then melted down, stamped into coins, loaded once again onto mules, and begins a journey that will cross entire oceans. A single silver coin, minted right here in the heart of Mexico, could end up in a market in Cadiz, Spain, or Manila in the Philippines, or all the way over in Canton, China. This was not a local economy. This was the beating heart of a global one. Allende grew up right inside this great machine. His family were Criollos, and what that means is they were of pure Spanish blood, but they were born here, in the Americas. They were the local elite. They owned the land, they had influence, they were deeply plugged into the life of the region. But there was always a limit, a kind of glass ceiling. The most powerful jobs, the highest military commands, the top government posts, the direct line to the viceroy, all of these were reserved for the peninsulares, men who were born across the ocean in Spain itself. Just imagine watching someone arrive from Madrid with their appointment already in hand to take a job that your family had spent generations preparing for, but could never, ever get. It wasn't about being totally excluded. It was about being excluded from the very top. A constant, frustrating reminder of your exact place in the imperial order. So Allende's response was to find structure. He joined the military, became a cavalry officer in the Queen's Dragoons. And here, his world became even more ordered, more defined. Life was a routine. You woke at a fixed hour, you inspected the horses, you cleaned your weapons, you repeated drills over and over until you didn't even have to think, until movement became pure reflex. Mount, form line, advance, wheel, charge. This was a world of absolute clarity. Orders came from above, obedience went up. For Allende, structure wasn't just an idea, it was a physical reality, a discipline that was trained into his very body. In everything he did, Allende sought control. He saw disorder, whether it was from unfair taxes or popular unrest, as a problem you could contain and solve through structure. He believed the system could be improved, that you could align local needs with imperial demands. And then, in 1808, the very source of that imperial order, the keystone holding his entire world together, well, it just vanished. The news came the way all news did back then. Slowly carried by ship across the massive Atlantic Ocean. And it was just bewildering. The King of Spain had abdicated his throne. His son had abdicated. The French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte had invaded Spain and put his own brother on the throne. The central pillar of the entire imperial structure, the legitimate king, was simply gone. And for the people living in San Miguel, in Guanajuato, this wasn't some abstract political debate. No, this was a deeply practical crisis that affected everything. Who signs the orders now? Whose authority do we listen to? The entire chain of command, the very system that gave Allende's world its meaning, was broken at the source. Authority hadn't disappeared, but nobody was quite sure where it was anymore. In all of this uncertainty, new conversations started happening. Secretly, behind closed doors in the city of Querétaro, men like Allende started to meet. And they weren't plotting to destroy the system, but to save it. Or at least their version of it. The plan was to form a junta, a kind of committee, to govern in the name of the missing king. And their plan, as you probably expect from a man like Allende, was a military one. It was all about timing, coordination, the quiet arrest of key Spanish officials, securing the weapons, and then using their own militia units to impose order fast. It was meant to be a controlled operation, a precise, surgical transfer of power. But any plan that's built on precision and timing, well, it depends on one thing above all else: secrecy. And in September of 1810, the secret got out. The conspiracy was discovered, arrests were about to be made. The careful clockwork operation that Allende had planned for, it just collapsed overnight. There was no more time for a controlled operation. There was only time to react. And another one of the conspirators, a parish priest named Miguel Hidalgo, he reacted first. In the small hours of the morning, in a little town called Dolores, he rang the church bells. Now, this was not the quiet signal for a military coup. This was a raw public call to the people. And the people came. This was the moment that everything became completely unrecognizable to Ignacio Allende. He had planned to use his drilled, uniformed militia, a force that understood a chain of command. What he got was something else entirely. It was an improvised mob, armed with farming tools, with sticks, with old rusty weapons. It was a force that didn't obey rank, but was moved by generations of grievances. It wasn't an army, it was a human flood, and it was driven by its own raw momentum. The people who saw it at the time used a specific word to describe it: chusma. Now, that word doesn't just mean a crowd or a mob. It implies a force that has no internal discipline, no structure at all. For Allende, the man whose entire life was built on structure, this must have been an absolutely terrifying sight. The very instrument of his revolution was something he couldn't even begin to understand, let alone command. And in the city of Guanajuato, this terrible contradiction became horrifyingly clear. The objective was the Alhóndiga de Granaditas, a huge, fortress-like granary where the Spanish loyalists were hiding. A military man like Allende would have seen it as a target to be taken through a siege with tactics and pressure. But instead, the doors were smashed open, the defenders were just overwhelmed, and all control simply vanished. What happened next wasn't combat. It was a massacre. And for Allende, this wasn't just a tragic part of war. It was proof. It was proof that the movement he had helped start no longer obeyed any logic that he could understand. He tried. He tried to get control back. He wrote letters. He argued. He attempted to impose a chain of command. But how do you give discipline to something that was never designed to have it in the first place? And yet, impossibly, this chaotic force kept winning. It swept through the Bajío, and in late October, barely a month after those bells rang in the Loris, it faced a trained, professional royalist army at a place called Monte de las Cruces, and it won. I mean, this was a stunning, absolutely decisive victory, and it opened the road. From the heights of Monte de las Cruces, they could see it, the final objective, the center of all power in New Spain, Mexico City. This is the impossible moment. I want you to put yourself there, on that ridge, as Ignacio Allende. Everything you planned for, everything you risked your entire life for, is right there, gleaming in the valley below you. This is it. This is your chance. You take the city, you establish a government, and you finally forge this chaotic mob into something ordered. So, do you advance? Well, to advance means you take the prize. But it also means unleashing the horror of Guanajuato on the capital itself. A city of palaces and cathedrals and 100,000 people. The destruction would be unimaginable. But to retreat means you lose this one perfect, decisive moment. It means admitting that the army at your back isn't an instrument you command, but a storm that you can only ride. It means choosing the illusion of control over the certainty of victory. They turned back. The largest insurgent army of the entire war stood at the very gates of the capital, and it turned back. History often calls this the greatest strategic mistake of the war, a catastrophic failure of nerve. But maybe it wasn't a failure at all. Maybe, for Allende, it was a moment of terrible, shattering clarity. In that one moment, Ignacio Allende, the man of order, stood at the edge of his goal, and he saw that the instrument he was holding was not one of creation, but one of total annihilation. He recognized that the control he had lost could not be magically put back together on a larger scale. This wasn't a failure of his revolution. It was the moment he understood with devastating certainty that the revolution was no longer his. It now belonged to a force he could not lead, could not command, and could not contain. a force that would, in the end, consume him too. Basta. This is Mexico.
If something here opened a door, stay and subscribe. Basta is the second look. Mexico without the filter, without the shortcuts. New episodes every Tuesday and Saturday. See our suggested video right there in the box.